Call the Plan Commission meeting to order. Everybody have a chance to take a look at the minutes?
So you're looking.
Move to approve. Second.
Motion and second to approve. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's approved. When we get to the agenda, when we look at the agenda, the first thing that we have here is a public hearing. Item number 3, A and B. It's my understanding that the principals here have decided to go in a different direction. So we are going to pull that from the agenda tonight. I didn't want to have to try to pronounce that anyway. And so everybody that's here for that item, you don't have to stick around. You can all go now.
I didn't think that was going to be pulled. So just for clarity. So it's,
Wow. That was kind of a joke.
wow.
So,
So it's not moving forward as a B?
They're going to change course with how they want to proceed. I don't know what
Was
that
that
is, what that looks
cantankerous?
like yet.
there you go.
Very last minute thing. Must have
Yeah.
We get to jump.
All right.
Which one was that?
On to unfinished business. Discussion, possible action on preliminary development plans and a rezoning recommendation to the Common Council for a zoning map amendment from AR agricultural residential to PRD3 planned residential development at St. Croix County tax parcel 020-1085-30-000 Art Development LLC.
Do you want to talk about council last night? Again.
I guess what we're talking about up here right now is what happened last night. Anybody miss what happened last night? I didn't think so. So we had public hearing on these parcels. Both of them are the Atwood property. It was, I think it was a real good airing of the issues that surround this development. And I think that the developers heard, well, actually, I think that they had come in with an amendment to it already. And it's my understanding that there might be some consideration for doing something a little bit different in the appearance of the project. So, Mike?
With that too, in your packet or as an additional handout, I provided the draft motions and the action items from the council meeting last night to provide a general framework for discussion. Obviously, I sent out the link to the video from last night's council meeting as well, if you had a chance to review that. Again, as the mayor said, it provided at least some good insight into some of the issues, concerns that people have. Also included, I asked that Glenn Van Wormer, our consulting traffic engineer, provide some additional bullet points on traffic issues. That seemed to be a continuing theme as we continue to deliberate on this specific item. I think Glenn's here somewhere. Is he in bed? There he is. Hey, Glenn. So he'll be here for any questions. Obviously, Dave Schofield's here also with SEH to go over questions from an engineering or civil site type. Any of those questions that might arise. Obviously, he and I worked together on developing the capital cost study when we worked through the annexation process. So yeah, with that, obviously, I know there's a lot of people here that probably want to maybe say a few words again too. I think we could probably just dive right into thoughts, questions, and I'm not sure where the Plan Commission, what the pleasure is, where they want to start, but anybody want to kick it off?
You want to read that?
We're not on this one.
Oh, that's right.
Well, I think since most of the folks here were there or viewed the meeting, we should hear of the changes that they're proposing, and then maybe we could go that direction.
Summarize it would be nice, yeah, again.
Summarize what?
Last night,
Well, no,
I didn't hear all that.
he came in with changes today, right? Is that what you're saying, Nick?
I mean,
I'd like to hear that,
Yeah.
and unless you need to talk about last
No,
night.
I'm just saying we haven't given them adequate time to go back.
No, but
and update.
they have come
Okay.
in with some changes, so, I mean, we want to hear from them anyway.
I'm Nick Vivian. I represent the project as legal counsel. We've heard from the Plan Commission previously. We've heard from the residents. We heard from the council last night as well. One of the issues that is probably a primary concern is height of the two proposed apartment buildings. Prior to the council meeting, it was our thought that perhaps the primary issue was a 70-foot height on the northernmost building, which would have put it at 5 stories with a retail component. Prior to the council meeting, we made the determination that we would reduce the height on that particular building to 60 feet, so that we would have two 60-foot apartment buildings that we proposed on that site. Since last night, in a short few hours, Greg and his engineering team have worked to look at reducing the height even further, thank you, to a concept which includes 3 stories as opposed to 4. And so what I have to show you here is a concept that would include 2 3-story buildings. We've also worked to reduce the density. Originally, we had planned for the apartment buildings to be 120 units apiece. We've reduced the density in each apartment building to 110 units. So the total density in the apartment buildings is 220 as opposed to 240. So with that, I'll pass out the new concept maps. I'll walk you through them, and then hopefully we can have some discussions about what we've presented here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow, that's quite a difference.
Quite a difference.
Hot off the press. Thank you.
So you'll recall, as this master plan sets up, on the eastern side of the property, we have the commercial lots, the 6 commercial lots located along Carmichael. In the center, we have the apartment buildings, and then on the west side, we have the single-family homes totaling 43. We had originally, kind of in the middle on the southern portion, earmarked that space for City Park. And we've had to change the plan a little bit, but we've preserved as much green space as possible, hearing the Plan Commission and hearing the council's desire for a significant amount of green space on this site. Naturally, in bringing down the height of the building, it required the expansion of the footprint of the building. And so rather than 2 buildings which are rectangular in nature, you now have 2 buildings which are L-shaped in nature, but still provide for ponding in the center portion, still provide for open space both to the south of the buildings, City Park, which is a little bit smaller than previously provided, and open space, which will be used for infiltration. Between the open space and the City Park area, you have roughly the same area, perhaps a little bit less, than what was provided previously. The infiltration area is important because obviously there has to be some drainage, but that area, with any luck, will remain dry for most of the year, subject only to events where that area might be utilized for infiltration. This eventually, as the property to the south, the Gagnon property also develops, this property will drain in conjunction with that parcel, and so that infiltration area should work just fine. Now, whenever you look to increase building size, you're going to give up green space. And so, understanding that we're decreasing the height, we're adding more building mass, they're lower buildings, you're giving up a bit of green space, but we think this plan actually works pretty well. And so we've taken all of the comments that we've received to date. We started with higher buildings, obviously, and more green space. You have lower buildings and a little bit less green space. But at the end of this process, what you have here, again, is a map that fits, that if you were to overlap or overlay your land use map from your comprehensive plan, it overlays nearly identical. The density is exactly what was contemplated by your land use map and by your comprehensive plan. And this sets up, I think, hopefully as well as it possibly can to address the issues related to height that were raised both by this body and by the city council.
Question on height.
Sure.
Still having the retail component on the ground floor, or is that
No, that'll be
concept is gone as strictly 3 stories of apartments all the way through?
correct. Yeah.
Just want to be clear on
Yeah.
on understanding that.
Yeah, and that's another give back. We think that retail on the first floor is a cool feature that we don't have in Hudson currently. You know, whether it's coffee shop or daycare or, you know, whatever it might be, there were some nice amenities that we thought could be very, very compatible to serving this neighborhood. Unfortunately, what you sacrifice when you lower the building is you need the first floor for units. And so these will be all apartments and no neighborhood retail component whatsoever.
So Nick, now that you've addressed the height issue and somewhat of the density issue, what about the safety issue as far as traffic? In particular, Vine for me, because of the schools which are there and the YMCA. And I spent most of a big portion of this afternoon just walked that neighborhood. And I also sat there at the Diamond and Vine Street interchange, and I felt like a cop. Everybody slowed down when they saw my car.
Your red shirt.
Yeah.
Thanks. And there's an issue there, obviously, but it obviously wasn't as bad as it should or would be with this development and if school was in session.
Yeah.
So a tunnel came to mind for me, or an overbridge pass. Something has got to give, or as earlier we talked, maybe a 4-way stop. I think this is a good idea, this hawk that they introduced to us last night. That's a good idea. That I know public safety, I'm going to keep this around. But I think we may be at the point of a 4-way stop at Diamond and Vine Street.
Sure.
So those are some of my observations. So this looks different, like you're actually addressing more of Vine Street. Is that true from your original?
No, it's the same. The traffic improvements are the same as what we had provided previously. And I don't disagree with you. I think there are certainly traffic issues that exist, and there are traffic calming measures that need to be taken. And whether they're additional stop signs or whether they're signals like on Carmichael, they need to be addressed. Our goal is to provide safe crossings across Vine Street. That's absolutely critical because there will be children that will be crossing, there will be families that will be crossing, and we want people to be able to get from the north to the south, which is why having those crossings and having the trails are incredibly important. But I don't disagree. If the traffic needs to be calmed at Diamond and Vine, that's a discussion to have with public safety, and we're certainly willing to have that discussion. It doesn't necessarily directly impact this particular development.
Well, as a public safety chair, I will tell you, we've addressed this issue more than once in many years I've been on that committee. We are at the point of a stronger traffic control, and we are at the point of taking the kids off the road. So either going underneath or over the road, I think. And it's going to cost money, but I don't see any other way to do it if we put this much more traffic and whatnot into that corner. So that's where I'm coming from.
Yeah.
Safety is the big issue. Traffic is the big issue. So the more we can focus on that with your guys' help, and I do appreciate it, and I'm glad that you came back with this different proposal because you listened last night. You listened at the last Plan Commission meeting. And that shows that you're willing to negotiate and do the right thing for those neighbors that brought those concerns to us. That's responsible development, and I appreciate that.
And we're certainly not opposed to a bridge over the road. We're certainly not opposed to other options. Those discussions need to be had as to how you fund them, because those costs are considerable. I don't know, for example, what there's room for there. I know that tunnels take considerable space and the elevations have to be appropriate, and what that might take to get under Vine, given the topography out there. But Greg has said from day one, we want to make this a safe development. And so we're more than open to the discussion and how the development happens and how the crossings happen. I think from our perspective, we'd certainly like to see a recommendation moving forward on zoning and a recommendation moving forward on the site plan. The specifics of the crossing can certainly be dealt with as part of the development agreement and those negotiations that need to take place. And I think that's probably the appropriate time for it, but know and understand that we want to be a part of that conversation because we want the folks who live in this development to be able to access the Y and to be able to get up to the middle school and the
So
elementary
you
schools.
put the tunnel in on your entrance, we'll put the four-way stoplights at Diamond.
Those are discussions for later.
You want zoning approved, don't you?
My concern still is Vine going further south. You add up the potential number of cars in the subdivision, and I mean, I can't say it's all your fault, but looking at, let's say 90 cars from the single family, you look at 110, say there's 2 people, 2 cars at each one, there's 220. So there's 300 cars that are gonna be coming and going out of that, and if they're gonna go downtown, they're gonna go down Vine. It's not so much at the intersection to the subdivision, it's further down, where they're having existing problems now, and I don't know if it's fair to even say to you that maybe that will be the straw that breaks the camel's back or makes other things be done, as Randy's suggesting, as maybe it's time for stop signs or something else, but that's still my concern. It'd be wonderful, and you've made it clear as to why, to have other access to that property, via other roads, to get out of there different ways, less traveled, something.
Yeah, and I think the answer to that question is multifaceted in that I think it helps to have a signalized intersection on Carmichael.
Yeah.
I do believe that there will be a significant percentage of the traffic that comes out to this entrance and goes south. And whether they go south to the interstate, whether they go south to all of the shopping areas, whether they go to the frontage road and down Cooley, I mean, that will help because it will provide an additional access point. I also think that as property develops down this corridor a little bit, property that's in the town currently, but as these roads connect to the south and we wind up with presumably more signals on Carmichael and more opportunities to get out to Carmichael in a controlled way, that's going to be helpful as well. So, part of it is we have to be thoughtful going forward about what the development looks like and, understanding that there is a plan for Carmichael, that the plan involves a lot of traffic calming. I don't disagree that Vine Street is a challenge. And when you've got houses, you've got some density, you've got the Y, you've got the schools, it's a challenge that we're going to have to deal with. But there are traffic calming opportunities. I don't think we can solve all of them, but we can certainly be a contributor to helping to alleviate the congestion in this area. And I do think that the $1.5 million being invested by this developer in your infrastructure in the form of widening the street, in the form of turn lanes, in the form of providing better access and circulation in this area is going to help. The other thing that I would point out is that your traffic engineers have studied this corridor for a long time, and understanding that there are traffic concerns. Your traffic engineer has said that with these improvements, the improvements will handle the density from this development. Now, I understand that they don't cure everything, and there are going to be more cars out there. But we do have to rely on the experts, on the engineers who, tell us that this will be an improved corridor with these improvements.
And then the last thing is I've had a couple calls right before the meeting tonight, and people wanting to make sure that kids can still, Randy said this multiple times, walk through the area, ride bikes, do something. They asked where the frontage, where the sidewalks were gonna be and all that stuff, and I said interior. But of course, some of it I don't know. And, Vine is part of that, because they're walking apparently all the way from Prairie down too, which, that's a whole separate issue, but part of the whole complex, if you will,
Right.
part of the grapefruit.
Right. Oh, we agree that this has to be a connected community, and we have, one of the great things about Hudson is that you can get to most places by trail or by sidewalk.
Right.
And that's the beauty of living here. And so we've ensured that this particular development has those connections, all internal. We don't want to put people out on the right-of-way next to 45-mile-an-hour traffic. So coming through the internal component of this development is the right thing to do. Providing sidewalks is the right thing to do. Improving the sidewalk north of Vine, so that sidewalk is actually continued to the intersection. That's certainly not part of our development, but it's an added component that provides for some additional connectivity in that crossing. And so I think we've done as much as we can possibly do within this development and even external to the development to provide connectivity to the rest of the city as we try to connect trails and sidewalks.
Just a reminder that we do have a tunnel in town by a school, by the Y. So it's not a unique situation. And the topography over by Vine Street, and I know it's further down from the project, but it directly affects your project. There are water-based, stormwater runoff where there's some potential to connect underneath. So and I don't recall how much that cost out there. Do
It's
you?
a culvert. It's just a culvert.
Well, whatever it is. but-
Cul-de-sac.
So there's an opportunity there.
Would it might be helpful to hear from Glenn too, to kind of walk through what his comments are specific to transportation as, as our city engineer.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Glenn, can you?
Did you hand out the issues?
Yes. Yep.
What we tried to do is summarize the various issues that have come up at the meetings and in discussions, and some that we thought of. Doesn't mean that they're all issues that you have to resolve or work on tonight, but they're out there. Some of them are, we're just trying to give you some more information and data so that you can see how possibly to solve them, resolve them, or get some further direction to staff and others as to what to do. We tried to, if you go through it, the first thing we try to do is give you some background data on the fact that our traffic volume information we use for the Carmichael corridor is pretty darn good. We didn't just take a count and then say, well, that's it. We took about 100 counts and merged them all together, came up with a reasonable approximation of the volumes. DOT has seen them and they said, good job. So that's a little bit of a pat. The volumes, there's a lot of questions, a lot of numbers are thrown out. In here, we put the volume numbers down for each of the components so that you'll see what it is on a daily basis. Example, the 43 single-family dwelling units will generate about 400 trips per day. So it's not just, out to work and back home and then never go out again. They're in and out all day long on a single-family. Apartments have a little lower trip rate. So what we tried to point out, give you some numbers to go with that so you have an idea. As Nick pointed out, a lot of that traffic will go south because a lot of your origins and destinations are down on 94 or south of 94 or on the Cooley Road corridor. So we tried to give you a little information on trip distribution. If you look at the different components that you have in this development, the Atwood or the Hearst development. There's some commercial, but a lot of that commercial will probably be oriented towards Hudson as a whole, not just traffic in the in the neighborhood. And some of that will come from the traffic that's already on the road. If, for instance, you put in a convenience store gas station, probably half of the traffic is already on Carmichael or on Vine. And so they'll just pull in rather than go by. So it's not going to be all new traffic. So we tried to give you that information. There were some questions about access, and we've been working as part of the Carmichael corridor study to determine not only the existing like Cooley and Crestview and Center, but where should the future ones be and how do we get the road so we don't end up with more traffic problems than solutions. And we looked at a couple of a couple of additional major intersections between Cooley Road or between actually Hillcrest and Vine. And this would be one which would be a good location in terms of providing access to this development or to the church. Go ahead,
With
sir.
that said, wasn't there ultimately 4 lights planned along Carmichael in that stretch between Vine and Cooley? Initially,
Initially?
on the drawing board, that kind of thing.
There was one in Hillcrest, one at this location, and then I've seen different concepts where we have 1 or 2. It depends upon how the property to the south,
Right.
how Gagnon develops. Ideally,
Right.
if the volume is there, we can get us one more intersection rather than have one additional one to put into that traffic signal coordination. If you notice, the traffic signals that you have there since December have operated so you can get more green lights as you go through. And that's because we put in a pretty sophisticated program. But the more you put in, the tougher it is to get people to get green lights. And so we want to be careful not to put in more than we need, but make sure that everything that's needed is in there. We can get the system to work, but it gets tougher. They say there's about 4 problems that you can have trying to put in a signal system, and we ran on all 4 on Carmichael Road, so it was interesting. We burned out a computer trying to do that. The future road needs, we outlined that in the Carmichael Corridor Report, and essentially you need 4 lanes. They're similar to the section you have to the south from Cooley Road north. We have done a detailed study of the Hillcrest intersection when Carmichael Ridges was brought up or was discussed. And we have the west side all set up for the future. All we have to do is take a curb out by Culvers and put in 2 more lanes and we're all set, except for the road improvements on Carmichael. We need some dual turn lanes in there to handle the future traffic. So we've gotten to that point of the I'll say the study of the planning. One of the things that comes up a lot is pedestrian and bicycle facilities, and we've looked at how can the trail system be improved with this development. We've completed, the developer has gone across the street to put a trail on the north side as opposed to in front of his development, so that you now have a trail, or you will have a trail that starts at Carmichael and goes all the way downtown. There's a missing link between Carmichael and the lift station. And so that's there. The west side trail on Carmichael Road will go into the development and go all the way down and stub into the Gagnon property so that you have the opportunity to extend it to the south. But then there's also a lot of little trail connections that the developers agreed to put in, connecting over to the church on the other side of Carmichael, going over on White Oak to into the development next door, so that those folks have access to the Carmichael Trail and a connection to the city as a whole. So it's been thought out not just what for this development, but what's there for additional developments. The one item that we have not done a lot of work on is Vine Street, because that's kind of a separate problem. We know at Vine in Wisconsin, as an example, the present project is putting in turn lanes. So you'll have left and right turn lanes on all 4 approaches and eventually a traffic signal. And if you look at the school traffic and watch it, as I've done a few times, it doesn't work real well because there's a lack of turn lanes. And the problem is you have a 4-way stop. And what occurs is you're basically metering the traffic. when school lets out, somebody comes south and goes east, and somebody comes from the west and goes east, and it's just a constant flow, like you see on the meters when the meters are running on some of the ramps. With the signal, you're going to get platoons, which should help somewhat. But we still have to go look at some of the other intersections and find out, well, what can be done to improve or make them safer. And we keep throwing out a term, well, we'll do traffic calming. Well, traffic calming is not just something you plop in. It has to be worked into that specific intersection or road. So that's something that still needs to be worked on, but not necessarily as part of the project. And then finally, we've made a number of requests for the internal street system to make sure that that functions properly and safely. Road widths, the configuration of the intersection on the north side. So that basically is all that's in here, but a lot of numbers and information as you go through, or as somebody in the future starts looking at what you did, there's a record. Trying to quickly summarize months of work into 5 minutes.
Right.
Anybody?
Yeah, I'm going to prompt Glenn on one thing here, that at Diamond Path, there's been a suggestion that maybe to do a pedestrian underpass. There are some other options that we'll look at first before we jump to a pedestrian underpass, I would presume, correct?
Well, an underpass has benefits and it has some problems, and you want to make sure that you flush all of them out as you go through it, so that when you make the final decision, it's the best solution for that intersection.
What are those? Because
Well-
quite frankly, I don't care what if we're taking the people off the road, I don't care what the downside of an engineering report would say. That's just my opinion.
Sure. Well, one of the things that we have there is in order to cross north and south, you have to cross 4 lanes of traffic. You have the 2 through lanes, then you have left and right turns going westbound. And that length of crossing is problematic, because you feel uncomfortable with that length of a walk across. And so there's some things that we can do to shorten that. Do a pedestrian refuge,
Bump
some other
outs.
things. Bump outs to shorten that, to do some signalization with, a hawk isn't necessarily great at an intersection, but there are some other type signage that helps.
And are you talking specifically on Diamond and Vine?
I'm talking specifically at Diamond and Vine.
Okay.
But that's not the only intersection that has, and there's a number of very wide intersections through there.
I think the best thing we can probably do is make sure that that's addressed completely and thoroughly, and look at tunnels, look at the hawk. And the young lady that provided the information really knows how the hawk works. I was impressed. There's one up in St. Cloud, if you want to drive up there and see it. I think Burnsville has one, so there are some around. But it is primarily for a major intersection, but it might be scaled down to work. So there's a number of things can be done, and I think we have to look at all of them before you say, this is what we want to do. So, any questions on traffic regarding the development or all the information I've thrown at you?
Thanks.
Thanks, Glenn.
Yeah, I think it's worthwhile. So the attorney mentioned some of the improvements on Vine and Carmichael. Along Vine, they are doing additional turn lanes as you approach Carmichael. So there's an existing turn lane will be lengthened eastbound to southbound, so right turn lane. Right now, the multi-purpose path just ends, and pedestrians are dumped out onto the shoulder of the roadway for the last 800 to 1,000 feet. They're going to be putting in a curb and then a off-street pedestrian walkway on the north side there, which is, I think, a vast improvement. I think we can all agree that a painted white line won't stop a car, so that'll certainly help. On Carmichael, north of Vine, right now, if you've driven it, and you may not have noticed it, but hopefully after I explain it, as you come and want to take a left, either a northbound left turn or a southbound left turn, those lines are offset, and so you cannot see past the opposing left. Part of these improvements will be to line those up so that as you're turning left, you can see the through vehicles approaching. That'll be a tremendous improvement. So that Carmichael will be widened to the east, north of Vine. It's on the map. It's a little hard to see as we're talking here. As you go south on Carmichael, At the intersection, at the proposed intersection to the development on Carmichael, there will be left and right turn lanes at that location. There will be a traffic signal at that location. That will line up with the church across the street so that some of the vehicles, I mean, that is out in the town. They connected to the roadway and didn't have any sort of traffic controls there. They will be connecting to that traffic signal. So
Will that be 4-lane, or will it still be under the same configuration that it is today?
Right, it'll, as it's shown right now, it's a single through north and south. We have requested that the developer provide right-of-way so that when we do go out to 4 lanes, that we're not reacquiring property that we just allowed to be platted as part of this project. Obviously, there's gonna be some shared pane there with the east and the west sides of the roadway, so that it's not gonna all come towards the Atwood property. There'll be some on the town side and some on the city side.
Dave, how about the north entrance of the church lot?
The north entrance on the church lot, we have asked that that be accommodated for some southbound left turns. So as you're on Carmichael, getting off of Carmichael onto the church, that you'll be able to turn left. We already have some widening there for the turn lanes just south of there, so we have some median space that we can use for turn lanes there. That will certainly help. I suspect that once we put signals in there, that how they use their driveways are going to change a little bit, because obviously their users don't want to be, their parishioners, I'm sorry, don't want to be sitting when there's a traffic signal that could have gotten them out. They're not going to want to sit there and wait for an excessive amount of time. I think some of the discussions about connections are fantastic. Obviously, if this was coming in with the Gagnon property, we would have another access onto Carmichael. We looked at it, and one of the earlier development plans showed 2 accesses onto Carmichael, and it got very busy for a very short amount of time. I know this looks like a very large development north and south, but 2 accesses onto Carmichael in that area, we just didn't have enough room to properly set up those turn lanes, or the developer didn't, and we concurred in order to set up the turn lanes with tapers and all that sort of thing. So I think the proposed plan of 1 access onto Carmichael is appropriate for this development.
What's gonna pull the trigger to widen Carmichael out to 4 lanes? I guess now that you say it's maintaining the same shape except for some accommodation for turn lanes and things like that, what will be the trigger that makes that go to dedicated 2 lanes in each direction?
Well, I know there's obviously some reasonable concerns about traffic for this Atwood property, but I think it's worth noting that you have some undeveloped lands or underdeveloped lands east of Carmichael that I think eventually you'll have some development pressure to bring those into the city and look at development there too. So there's a runway in front of us in terms of the amount of traffic that will be on Carmichael. The studies that Glenn has done, and I won't put words in his mouth, but the studies that he's provided have some assumption of growth in this area, and then as we get into that growth phase, that's when you would trigger that.
How about connecting out of the southwest corner of the subdivision by Lot 1 there over into Stone Pine? Is that going to be a through street there?
That will eventually be a through street. The White Pine Drive there was platted so that it hit the property line between Gagnon's and Atwood's. Mm-hmm. And so we don't have enough room to actually make the connection at this time, or the developer doesn't. They only have 33 feet of right-of-way to make it, but eventually that will be connected when that Gagnon property comes in. That will be a requirement.
Okay.
Perfect.
Nick, or maybe Mike, you can address the buffering on the west side of this property. So the folks all on, was it Ruby and all that, are those trees that are there? I was up there, it's pretty wooded in the back of those yards, except for a couple of those properties. Are they staying and then you're adding more and a buffer? Is that what I recall?
Yes, that's correct. And I'll share with the plan commissioners the slides that I shared with the council last night.
Thanks.
We got some here, I don't know if we got those.
I got one, Dave.
Yeah, I think we got one. I got that, yeah. Is that what you got?
I'll take an extra one.
You need one.
I got it here somewhere in this pile.
This is mine. Dave, Fred needs one.
I do need one. No, I thought I had one. Thank you.
So what we did here, within the last few days, we had Todd Erickson, our engineer, flew a drone on this site. And he positioned the drone at the finished height of the 60-foot building when we were planning on 4-story buildings. And what we wanted to do was really get a depiction of what these buildings at their maximum height would see looking in all directions, but predominantly to the west. And so what you have are a number of slides. The first few are at 60 feet from the northern building, looking west toward the Vine Hills neighborhood. And you see that the tree line all the way to Carmichael is relatively thickly wooded. Now those trees that form that tree line are actually in the backyards of the property owners. They are not on the Atwood property. And so those trees will stay. In addition, we are proposing some berming and some additional screening on that property line. So what you'll notice is that really there aren't many homes that see directly through that property line, through that tree line, into this development. When you look at the 60-foot view from the south building, you see a home which looks at this property, which has a tree in front of it, which blocks the view, but you can see the home. And then you have another that's positioned to view in a more southerly direction. But by and large, this tree line provides cover, at least in the backyards of these homes. And the point that I made last night to the council was to say that not only do you have that tree line, and then you're going to have some berming, and you're going to have some additional trees, but then you're going to have a row of homes, and then you're going to have the road, and then you're going to have another row of homes. And so there's going to be a lot of screening and a lot going on between the backyards of the homes that exist in Vine Hills and those apartment buildings. We're sensitive to screening. You know, obviously we don't want people to look out their backyards and see massive buildings. We'd prefer that they see trees. And I think the visual evidence is pretty clear that all the way to Vine, that tree line is thick and provides significant cover. And where it doesn't, obviously, you know, we're going to focus on screening to make sure that there is additional coverage. But what we want is community. I mean, we want those backyards to line up. We want people to have nice private homes. We want proper screening and transition to the apartment buildings.
I think the biggest lack of screening that I saw down there, it was on White Pine End.
Right.
Is in the house towards the north is the one that would have most visible.
I think that's right.
We had the same issue when the golf course was redeveloped, the houses abutting that on the west side. And they were all very concerned because they bought land at one time which they thought was on the golf course. And then the last thing they wanted was an apartment building out their dining room window. So they did that very tastefully to really everybody's, I think, accommodation to make that okay. And I guess that's what we're hoping here too.
Yeah, and that's certainly the goal. And the last time we were here, we showed some modeling as to what it would look like with a 70-foot building. And our modeling would indicate that out of the backyards of these homes, you won't see a 70-foot building. Now we're sitting at 3 stories, which is probably a 50-foot building, right? And so between the existing tree line, between the additional screening, with 2-story homes in between, hopefully a 50-foot building is not visible. And it's certainly our goal that there's going to be enough screening and buffering to make sure that it's not anything that will be a significant issue for any of the homeowners.
It also maintains a small town atmosphere, which I think there's an awful lot of people that like Hudson for that fact. Small town. You get glaring buildings, it's not a small town. You keep them to size, and then they still think that.
And the council was very clear last night that it wanted congruence between the neighborhoods. And I think one of the things that we have to think about, we as the city of Hudson have to think about, I know we're comparing the Vine Hills neighborhood to this neighborhood. When I look at it, I view it as you're going to have to make sure that your neighborhoods along Carmichael are congruent, because that's your urban corridor. That's what your comprehensive plan says, and that's where it says you place your higher density developments. And so, you know, as you think through the challenges of providing some higher density housing at more affordable rates for folks who want to live in the city, who work here, I mean, that has to be where it is. So not only are we looking at congruence with the neighborhoods as they exist today, but congruence in the future as to how that corridor develops, because that almost has to be where your higher density housing is going to exist.
Mike, what are you looking for? What has staff identified that needs to be done before or contingent on an approval of the zoning change, besides the laundry list you gave us?
You know, obviously we just got this concept, right? So, you know, I think if the Plan Commission is desirous of moving this type of concept forward, you know, I would suggest that staff have the time, at least probably a week, to get through, kind of like we had in the packet, all of our comments. You know, I'm sure there's things on here that, you know, the engineer and Todd is, you know, that we know we've got to at least update, right? But we'll need a little more time, at least before council, to hammer that out. I mean,
Flushing out the traffic as
yeah,
well.
I see some things we talked about requiring a sidewalk connection over, you know, along Vine Street over to Diamond. So it would come east, it'd be on the south side of Vine. You head east, and then you'd come down internal to the subdivision where that green space kind of makes that diagonal to the southeast. So then we connect in there as well. There's that piece. This sanitary sewer lift stations moved, obviously, with the change in the proposed open space. Further to the east, we haven't looked at that. You know, we don't know where the turn lanes and everything. I think it's pretty consistent with what they had previously. I can see that he changed the trail to make it more accommodating per our recommendation, to split between lots C4 and C3. You know, there's just a number of things that I think you know, it would be unfair for me to say, oh yeah, we can just, you know.
That's fine.
I
You
want
say
to
you
make
think a
sure
week?
that we have adequate time before the council, before we do anything, yeah.
1 week?
I think it's worth noting, because this is a PRD, the master plan becomes part of the zoning. And so there's some things in here, I see probably all the things that Mike saw and maybe a few others, that there are some things that a final site plan approval could not be issued. But as they're working towards a master plan, I think generally speaking, what they're showing is the footprints of the development. They're showing the generalities of the improvements. There's clearly some things that still need to be hashed out, but from a master plan perspective, they're getting close.
Well, and I think it's good to point out that in a PRD, in 255-15, which is the PRD zoning chapter or section, it talks about preliminary master plans. There still has to be a process to go to final master plan approval, right? So, you know, this is the concept, kind of like how we do in 255-85 for site plan approvals. We have concept, and then we move into the final development plan process. Moreover, there's a CUP process. So with PRDs, there's obviously different types of flexibility and different nuance to it. You know, I would imagine we still want to look at architectural standards for the development, four-sided architecture on the commercial pieces. You know, all of that, all the bulk standards, which I would call them setbacks, you know, height restrictions, colors, whatever you want to call it, always boils down, and that's where that gets fleshed out in the CUP, which goes through another public hearing, actually goes to public hearing in this body, and then ultimately to council. So there'll be another round of notifications that go out as that moves forward. So there's a lot of,
Is a week realistic, or you need longer?
well, for concept, it's realistic.
Okay.
So how do we go that direction, and what do we have to say or approve or do?
Do I hear from anybody or?
We can, what,
Do you?
so, when is our next meeting scheduled?
Plan commission would be July 9th.
Just postpone.
So, we'd want it here. We're not sending it to council, so, July 9th would be the first time. That's how much time we'd have.
In other words, postpone and come back here the 9th
Yeah,
and do it then?
yeah, I think,
I will move to so do.
okay.
I'll second it.
Motion and second. I tell you what, do you want to amend the motion and incorporate the second piece here too?
Yes.
B,
Huh?
you want to add the second part to it also?
Yeah, I mean, it's two parcels for the same development.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Everybody understand that? Any discussion? All is in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's approved.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Discussion and possible action on a rezoning recommendation to the Common Council for a zoning map amendment from RM1 multiple family residential to RM2 multiple family residential, and a comprehensive plan amendment from medium density residential to high density residential at St. Croix County Tax Parcel 236-2041-00-000 Landvest LLC.
Let me get organized.
Okay. I get it.
Yeah. 5 minutes, that's good.
All right, we're all very familiar with this property as well. Again, a lot of discussion last night, a lot of concerns from the neighbors, most notably on the east side of Old Highway 35, and then again also in the Hudson Meadows development. Alderman Alms provided a letter, and he asked me to read it into the record, so it's might take a few minutes,
Yeah?
but I'm going to go ahead and do that. So, dear Mr. Johnson, Mayor O'Connor, and the Plan Commission members, thank you so much for taking the time to read my letter, and I respectfully request that this letter be read into the record at this evening's Plan Commission meeting. I really wanted to be present for the meeting, however, I'm out of town for medical appointments with my son. We heard a lot of feedback from residents last night concerning the proposed development on the corner of Old Highway 35 and Hanley. We also had a discussion after these neighbors spoke, so I and others on the council could give you a little more insight into my perspective. The gist of the recommendation that I put forth was to deny the rezoning to RM2 until we further clarify Old Highway 35, annexation, and whether to move forward with curb gutter and the adjacent park and ride annexation. Park and ride. Annexation outlet to Old 35 and jurisdiction from a public safety end. As you know, the 2009 comp plan identified this parcel as commercial. We agreed to amend the comp plan a few months back and change the zoning from commercial to RM1. As the current owner looked to market this parcel to other development opportunities, I think there is good consensus from all sides that this change was a good one. I'll submit to you that I made the mistake of not bringing up at that point what I am bringing up now. As such, I respectfully offer all Plan Commission members, the property owner, and proposed developer an apology for my timing. This corner of the city is essentially an island unto the city and is an often overlooked area within the city. As one of the Plan Commission members stated at the previous meeting, this entire area will look far different in 5 to 10 years. I agree with that sentiment, and I also think there is an opportunity here to be more thoughtful and toward infrastructure needs as it relates to potential development of Old 35. The current comp plan does not contemplate future development to the east of Old 35, and I believe the lack of work done here, to no fault of anyone, is very critical in deciding the future use of Old 35. Potential annexation thereof, potential curb gutter, sidewalk treatment, and potential lighting of that roadway. The challenge with this proposal is directly related to this roadway. I firmly believe that the access from the proposed development should not go through Meadowlark and Hudson Meadows, and I will in no way support any development plan that utilizes access on Meadowlark. Access, in my opinion, should only be made directly onto Old 35. Making an access point with the additional traffic needs would call for turn lanes on Old 35, and this brings into question the annexation of Old 35 in order to make these improvements to the roadway. Then the question becomes, how much of Old 35 should be annexed? How much of this roadway should be improved? And when should the improvements be made? All of this directly relates to the aforementioned contemplation over future development of Old 35. Additionally, while the park and ride could be the solution of the access point to Old 35, we would need to first, as a city, decide that this park and ride be annexed into the city from the township. And as an aside, it is my opinion that annexation would both offer good access and give Hudson Police jurisdiction over the property, which would arguably lead to greater safety. It is my belief that at a minimum, both the park and ride and all of Old 35 from the movie theater down to at least Hanley, if not Tower Road, be vetted with a plan before accepting any development agreement and before making any zoning change related to density. Ultimately, and I realize this is a big ask, I would prefer to have the groundwork on potential growth to the east, whether it is decided as growth or no growth, before accepting development agreements or making further changes to zoning. In other words, a moratorium on this parcel until we contemplate growth, no growth, east to the east. I'm not an expert here, but I would assume that we as a city would want to handle the old Highway 35 roadway differently depending on the answer to that question. Whether or not you agree with my minimum ask or big ask, I respectfully request that we step back and have forethought into the overall picture of this area and the potential infrastructure needs therein before we make future or further changes to zoning and development of this parcel. Thank you again for taking the time to read this letter. Sincerely, Bill Alms. I'm parched.
Can you read the motion that was sent down from council?
Yes. Motion by Alms, second by Hall, to recommend this back to the Plan Commission with a keen eye on making the groundwork on Old 35 and making a decision point on the park and ride before rezoning. All in favor?
We discussed that park and ride once before, when we talked about this property before.
Yeah, and there's obviously a significant amount of process that, or at least some process and answers that we still need to have from both DOT and, further communication with the town of Hudson and Troy if we want to talk about moving, south of Tower or south of Hanley as well.
And I agree, and I don't think that we should move anything until we annex 35 and/or purchase that lot, that park and ride, before we do any rezoning.
What was the council's discussion when you annexed this land?
But we would have to turn that 35 into a regular operating city street. Curb, gutter, basically redo it probably, huh?
But I mean, was that discussed when the council decided to annex this land in?
That is the underlining thought.
So you talked about it?
No, we didn't go into depth about it. We went into depth about just annexing. That we should figure out if that's what we want to do. Sounded like that was what we should do. Am I wrong?
I'm just asking for clarity, so you annexed?
I wasn't here when you annexed that property.
The motion was to figure out, do we annex it? Don't do anything until we find out if we're going to annex it and what we can do with the park and ride.
Annex the park and ride.
All of it. Or buy the park and ride.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm sorry, my question was when the city annexed this piece of property, though, was the discussion what was the discussion around that?
We haven't got that far yet.
When the city annexed the property that is now Hudson Meadows is the question.
One of the concerns that was brought up here when we discussed this before was the effect on the property owners on 35. If we annex it in, do they get curb and gutter? You know, their concern was that they end up having to eat the curb and gutter, so.
Yeah, who pays for it?
And Frank, for context, was that several years ago, or was, I mean, we're talking,
Oh, this goes back several years ago on that? Okay.
And there is no appetite, I'm not speaking for anybody, but my feeling is no appetite to connect that property to Meadowlark.
that was my impression.
It just wouldn't be safe.
Well, what's being said then, so and until this issue gets resolved, there's no action on the item before us?
Wouldn't think so.
Huh?
Well, I think you want to send a recommendation to council to.
But we have to have the ability to answer those questions.
Yes, so I mean,
Before we can proceed, so it's giving you guys the marching orders of the information to come back with the recommendations, isn't it?
So we need some answers from the township and the
town,
DOT.
state, what that might look like, yeah.
How long do you need? Can we postpone this till the next meeting, or do we have to do something?
Well, I think there
different?
is, when we're talking about rezoning requests, it's a 90? Wendy, I'm looking at Wendy, she probably knows better. In terms of a shot clock, in terms of, I mean, we will have to, we can't just postpone it in perpetuity, because when we're dealing with the
Oh, I know
state
that.
or with,
That's teasing them.
exactly, and I don't think that's fair to the applicant or to the city or to the residents of Hudson Meadows in the area. So I mean,
So do we deny this request then for now, and what do we do? I guess I'm saying, how do we accomplish what needs to be done?
and maybe to hear from the applicant too, what their thoughts are. Maybe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Nick Vivian again, representing this project on behalf of Landbest. Couple of comments. This is a complicated project. It doesn't seem like it's complicated. My clients want to put up an apartment building on 6 acres, but with the park and ride and with Old 35, it makes it more complicated. We're in complete agreement on Meadowlark. We don't want to send the traffic down Meadowlark either. And to the extent anybody has suggested that, public or otherwise, that's not our intention. We want the access to go out to Old 35. From that perspective, as I indicated to the council last night, we're certainly willing to sign Meadowlark as an emergency access or to barrier Meadowlark with knockdown barriers so that fire and EMS can get through, but cars can't push north through Meadowlark. So that's our proposal on Meadowlark, is to ensure that no traffic heads north onto Meadowlark. We've heard that message loud and clear. With respect to the park and ride, I'm a little perplexed by how the park and ride impacts this 6 acres, because whether it's in or whether it's out, it still has to be utilized for transportation purposes. That's what the state said. And so it's not going to become a park, unfortunately. It may become some other transportation, there may be some other transportation use that gets utilized. But what my clients are committed to doing is to provide the city, should it ever take ownership of the park and ride, with access to that site through our access, through our driveway. And the reason that's important, in Glenn's report or his comments, there's a concept of consolidating the access points between the park and ride and this site so that you remove one access point. We are absolutely willing to work with the city and to include as a condition of approval that we provide the city with access to the park and ride site. And the city can develop the park and ride site however it sees fit. But we will agree that access to the park and ride site come through our access point. And so that issue then gets taken off the table. And so then there's this issue regarding Old 35. And from our perspective, it's difficult for the developer to go to the town to say, we want the town to provide the city with jurisdiction to Old 35. And at some point, the city has to go to the town and make that request, and there have been some of those conversations. From our perspective, the appropriate way to deal with this, should the Planning Commission be so inclined, would be to say, we recommend approval of the rezoning and of the comprehensive plan amendment with these conditions: no traffic to Meadowlark, access to the park and ride, and fully conditioned on the town agreeing to cede jurisdiction of Old 35 to the city. To do otherwise, and I respect Bill Alms immensely, but to do otherwise and to say there is a moratorium on one particular piece of property in the city of Hudson until we figure this out, to me, it does a great disservice to those that are looking to develop in the city. And I think it's unfair to single out this one property. But there is a solution, and that is to say, we want to move forward. We're going to limit access to this site. We're going to make sure that the city has access. And the only way that this moves forward is if Old 35 comes in. That then puts us in a position of partnership with the city to work directly with city staff and the city attorney to go to the town to say, we have a vested interest, we have a partnership, if you will, that if this development is actually going to move forward, we need Old 35 to come into the city. And so, I understand, again, there are issues in this developing part of the city. Councilmember Weber made a great point last night to say, this is a state highway. It's an old state highway, but it's a state highway. And so, is it a narrow road? It's not a narrow road. It's built for traffic, and it has some of the lowest traffic counts that you have in the city. Certainly not anywhere near comparative to what we discussed on the last project. So yes, we have to figure out the access points, but from a zoning perspective and from a comp plan perspective, it's certainly our request that the Plan Commission make some recommendations to move forward, conditioned on Old 35 coming in and conditioned on Meadowlark and access to the park and ride. And to do otherwise will be to prevent development on this site. And the problem with that is that if you don't have a developer working on this site, there's not a lot of motivation from anybody else to push forward with Old 35 coming in or the park and ride actually coming into the city. It becomes another issue that's out there with nobody pushing it. And it's gotten the attention that it has because we have a proposed development at this site. And I think moving forward with this process is a good thing for the city. But unless you have a developer actually pushing access onto Old 35, there's not a lot of reason to go out and actually take action on bringing Old 35 into the city.
Is that true, Mike?
Well, if the council directs me to do it, I have to,
It would be done regardless.
not necessarily regardless. If access on the 30,
With or without a motion, it's going to be done.
what will be done?
Working on 35, working on the park and ride. I mean, I just don't, I get it. To me, it's a horse apiece, right? I mean, let's just say we pursue a motion similar to what you're just talking about. What are you going to do? You're going to wait, right?
No, my clients have a closing date at the end of the month on this project.
But it's still up in the air, still unresolved, because we don't have a solution on 35, we don't have a solution on the park and ride, but you'll continue to pursue this? I mean, you'd do that anyway, wouldn't you?
Well, if the answer from the Plan Commission and from the council is we're going to wait and we're going to plan out this area, my clients have a decision to make as to whether they want to pursue this development or not. If the answer is we're moving forward subject to it coming into the city, we're going to close on the property and we're going to work with the city to pursue the town to bring this into the city. So it's not a horse apiece, and it's not. I think these guys have a very real decision to make. If the recommendation is we're going to put a moratorium on this property, we're not going to take immediate action, we're going to go into a process of planning and we're going to think about what we want to do next, well, the costs of buying and holding land for an indefinite period of time just at some point don't make economic sense. And that's a decision that has to be made relatively soon. And so as we look at this, it's a question of, is the Plan Commission and the council committed to working to develop this particular parcel, or is the perspective, we want to plan into the future this entire corridor, and if we do, these guys may decide that the unknown of any action is such a great risk that they're not going to move forward with the development.
Or do you move forward with the existing zoning that's on the property? I think that's the other component.
Well, the existing zoning would allow for a 97-unit complex, but what we hear from the council and from the Plan Commission is that we don't want access onto Meadowlark of any kind. And so, that also provides a significant challenge, because the reality is there is access onto Meadowlark. But I suspect that when we provide and submit a development plan for your review, even if we have emergency access out through the park and ride or out through Old 35, you're going to look at it and say, we don't want access of any kind onto Meadowlark. So it's sort of illusory to say, why don't you move forward with the existing zoning, while at the same time sending the message that we don't want Meadowlark to be used as the primary access point. And therein lies the issue. Either we're going to work together to get access onto Old 35 in partnership and in collaboration, or the city's position is we're going to wait until all the dominoes fall, and then we'll tell you whether we're in favor of the development. And it's just not a position that a developer of any kind can be in.
Anybody?
So when this was annexed in, what was the initial thought process of what this property would look like?
Commercial in the existing comp plan. In the 2009 comp plan, the original future land use plan had commercial, general commercial.
With access.
Well, no. I think, and I can't speak to exactly what the thought process was. It's in the staff report, I think. There's some additional detail in terms of
Single-family housing?
no. I can't answer that question, Mary Claire, I don't know. But not single-family housing, correct?
I could probably speak towards the 1993 comp plan, if you want me to.
Was it 93? Okay.
Sure.
Yeah, in 1993, this area wasn't even considered yet, but the opposite side of Highway 35 was considered all industrial. So I'm assuming moving beyond that, they were anticipating it to continue to be industrial as well.
They were starting the planning for the business park.
Suggestions?
Well, Nick's getting paid to say what he said, so it doesn't matter whether we wait or not, If we want to wait for our answers, that's what we're going to do. I mean, if we need to find out if we want to make that contact with I understand what you're saying out of respect, but we're not on your time frame. We want to make sure we're doing this right. There's other people involved, not just you and your developer. So if we were to wait until we found out more about the park and ride and whether there's an interest, or we start that conversation with the township, that's what we do.
I'd like to chime into that too from some people that stood up, you know, as neighbors when we discussed this before, as to the concerns about some of that where, you know, how is this gonna change my neighborhood? How is this gonna change my traffic and all that, just to get everything sorted out. And I realize, you know, Nick, you're trying to get a way to go where we both get what we want here, but I think there's too many unknowns for us to, you know, take that path at this point. And so we need to find some things out and have the talk with the township and all that. Who's gonna take over 35 and at what costs and all that kind of stuff. I mean, there's some big things there that have to be resolved. I mean,
It's an added expense to the city and the taxpayers, it's added maintenance. There's a lot of things we have to
Would that
consider.
tie into our new 10-year plan?
Capital improvement plan? Or the new comp plan? Oh, absolutely. The comp plan
Yeah,
would
yeah,
absolutely
no, I wouldn't
contemplate
change
that whole area.
Yeah, so,
it's just that park and ride thing and then that metal art thing is, you know, causing a twist and a curve here.
It's an access thing. I mean, so you boil it all down, it's an access thing, right? Whether that includes the DOT property or if it's just direct access onto 35.
Get that fixed up and then we'll know, or whatever, but I mean, it'd be nice to know everything.
But if it simply boils down to an access issue, then we're asking that you recommend conditional approval based on the access. And I understand you don't have to do what I'm asking you to do. I understand that completely. And I sit on your side of the table often, and I give my council clients the same advice. What you have here, though, is a good project. And what you have is an identified need for more of this type of housing in the city of Hudson. And you have a developer that has a track record of working with the city. And, you know, Commissioner York, to your point, we've addressed Meadowlark and we've addressed park and ride access in the form of not allowing vehicles on Meadowlark and in the form of providing access to the park and ride, whatever it may be. And so, you know, again, if the message from the Plan Commission is we're going to undertake a process of studying this to figure out what this part of the city should be, well, that's the message to the developer. But it's a good project that addresses a need with the developer that is currently developing in your city and has a track record of developing well and in working well with the staff. And to the extent that you set an indefinite time period for studying an issue that can be addressed with conditional approval, you may well lose the project. And maybe that's okay. And maybe that needs to happen in order to plan for the development of this area. But that's the challenge. It's really a challenge of direction and timing and the commitment to the risks that the developer has to take in order to move the process.
Nick, we're going to agree to disagree with Eric. Just because he loses the ball, he's going to take his flag and go home. I don't think so. He's been a responsible developer. I think he's going to wait until we make the right decision. We've got to listen to our citizens. That's the bottom line. And I think he's fair to believe, and I'd like to believe that he understands that.
We've tried to act in good faith with you. We're not trying to snap the rubber band here.
No, and I don't disagree, but if the message on Old 35 access is that we need to study it, and if the message is
No, that's wrong. You're wrong. The question that was asked last night and here is, do we want to annex Old Highway 35? And from my feeling, Mayor, correct me if I'm wrong.
Can we?
And can we? And is the appetite, to me, it was yes. Let's look into that. We're not going to study anything. I think the underlining thought was, yes, let's bring it into the city. So I think you're wrong on that point.
You know, the way I see this right now is, it's a question for this commission, whether, if everything were in place, if the park and ride is in place, if 35 is in place, would we approve the project? I mean, I think that's the question right now.
You're right.
And so I understand what you're saying, what we're saying is a little nuanced. You're looking for a message coming from this group that if those things fall into place, that we would approve the project. So you want a motion that would say, we're gonna do that contingent upon these things, right? What I was saying before is that I think that we're gonna pursue those anyway to see if we can do them, whether there's a motion or not. And I think Mike is still gonna be talking to the town of Hudson. I would talk to the town of Hudson to see if there's any appetite for any annexation over there. Mike is still, I'm sure, gonna pursue the DOT and come back to the city council. I think what you're looking for right now, the nuance here is that you're just looking for some type of message from this group that if those things are in place, that we would agree to that project.
Correct.
And so the question here is that, is there an appetite with this commission to approve that project if those pieces fall in place? Or do you want to wait until we hear back from Mike on what town has to say and what the state has to say?
Well, now when you say that, I'm against the PR3, the 150 units.
Okay.
I can't swallow that.
Okay. Anybody else? All right, I think, does everybody understand? I think we all do, right? So what's your pleasure here? What do you want to do? Is there a motion?
I'll make it, but I don't know what to say. What do I say?
I don't know what you want to say. I don't know what you want to say.
You want to postpone any decision until we have
I
studied?
want to postpone, but I asked is maybe the wrong choice of words, but I moved to postpone
Well, you said that you weren't supportive of the project, so your motion,
or to get answers. I can't support it. The mayor described it very eloquently. If we had all the answers to this stuff,
There you go.
But you said you wouldn't support the project, so I think those are two different things.
I have a problem
RM2.
with the PR3.
RM2.
Excuse me. Yeah, I have a problem with the height and all that. Yeah, I do.
Okay,
All right, so, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I interrupted you. What?
I can't approve it as is. Revised, different story. But as is, no.
What does revised mean?
In a-
Smaller,
Smaller,
less density?
a little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's say it stays
Well,
as,
that's-
it's already RM1. So if it's RM1,
No, but they came in asking for,
yeah, exactly, but, yeah, okay.
Clear as mud.
So here are the options. We could adopt a motion that Nick brought forward. There could be a motion that would just say we want to postpone or delay until we get answers from Mike.
So we know exactly what that process looks like and whether
Sure,
it's
coming from the town of
doable.
Hudson, coming from DOT. Fred, I mean, if you don't like it, you can move just to, you don't want the project, you want to turn it down. So I think
they'll work with us,
those are the three options.
but,
Well, then that would be Nick's motion then.
yeah, that's then the ball's in their court. I will make the move to postpone or delay this subject until we take the steps that we're talking about, contact the town, annexation, whatever steps need to be done here to resolve the issues that are before us.
Okay.
So, and to clarify, to find out exactly what the town's appetite is to move forward in that
Yeah,
process.
DOT, all that.
Cost, and then timing of what that would look like with the state, because obviously,
Right.
when you're dealing with the
And as
state.
expeditiously as we could do them, we owe them that favor.
I would say as expeditiously as would happen had we adopted Nick's motion. Right?
Yeah.
Okay. Is there a second?
Sure.
I'll make,
Emily, do you got all that?
Go ahead.
I have it, but this is without the conditions that Nick
Okay.
suggested,
Okay.
just to be clear.
Mary Claire?
So a question for clarity, so if they come back addressing those issues, you had stated that you wouldn't support the project. So if they come back and those issues are resolved, are we going to support the project?
Not as PR3, not as that high, I would ask for lower density and less height. They wanted 75 feet and 152 units. The original plan was 92. And it's no different than the Atwood property, I feel.
This one doesn't have the height. This one was 3 stories.
Was 3?
Yeah.
Was it?
Yeah.
Oh, excuse me.
3?
Was it 3? I'm sorry.
So 3 stories with how many units?
152.
Okay.
2 phases.
I stand corrected.
All right, so,
Your concern was the height on that one?
No, if it's
Density.
3 stories, no.
Does that change your motion?
Would I approve it with clarity here? I rescind my complaint or my remark about I can't be for it. I take that back.
all right, anything else on the motion? Anybody? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's approved. Discussion and possible action on a certified survey map for 499 County Road A, extraterritorial zone, town of Hudson, Lorraine Jacobs, William and Cheryl Welbys? Apologize, I butchered the last name.
Tiffany, you want to take this one?
Yeah. So the owners of St. Croix County tax parcels 020-1047-70-000 and 020-1047-90-000 have submitted a certified survey map to transfer land between a couple of parcels. Their properties are located within the city's extraterritorial zone, therefore they're required by a city to get approval per municipal code chapters 255-69 and 255-3D. Staff is recommending approval, essentially. If you have any questions, the surveyor is here to answer them as well.
No.
Everybody's worn out.
Yeah.
It's always good to be at the end of the agenda.
I move we approve the certified survey
And
map.
I will second that.
Got a motion, a second to approve. Any discussion? Would you like us to discuss this a little longer, or is anybody some people from outside? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's approved. Thanks. Yep. Discussion and possible action on recommending the Common Council set a public hearing date for a rezoning map amendment from PCD Planned Commercial District to PRD3 Planned Residential District, and a comprehensive plan amendment from the general business to medium density residential for Lot 12 of the unrecorded St. Croix Meadows Plat Park Place LLC.
Again, this is one of our procedural items, but I'm going to be very clear about what this is because I think it avoids some confusion later on. Ultimately, this is all part of the overall St. Croix Meadows site, which is zoned for a planned commercial district. What the new proposal is, or what the potential buyer or purchaser of this property, this lot 12, wants to do, is develop not one large multifamily building, which was allowed in the PCD, but develop some villa-type townhomes and some row homes. You'll see there's some conceptual renderings of what that product could look like, as well as a general master plan. So ultimately, what they need to do to accomplish, obviously what they would like to do with that change is to basically sever off Lot 12 from the PCD and create their own PRD and move forward. So again, we're just looking to recommend that the council or the plan commission set a public hearing date for August 5th. Thoughts, questions?
move.
I'll second.
Motion second.
I like that.
Discussion.
Nice.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's approved. Discussion of possible action on a certificate of compliance, concept and final development plans for Phillips Meadowsize Phase 2, St. Croix Meadows 2.0 addition at 2202 Carmichael Road, Phillips Meadowsize LLC.
We've had enough going on. I have Wendy Sander here with Cedar Corp, who's helped us, obviously in the past with the St. Croix Meadows plan reviews. So, Wendy?
Sounds good. 60 days is the answer, by the way.
60, not 90? Okay.
Okay, before you have a couple of items for the second phase for the Phillips project in St. Croix Meadows. You have a certificate of compliance. If you remember, you had an amendment to your zoning code last year that does allow this type of manufacturing, high-tech type facility in your zoning if you approve their certificate of compliance. So that's one piece of this. And then they are coming forward with their concept and their final development plan under 25585. And so you have before you some drawings and some pictures. It is going to be very similar to what they're in the process of building right now, which is their first phase. It is 202,000 square feet, but there will be a mezzanine and a basement, so there'll be a little more manufacturing space, about 245,000 square feet. But a very similar look to the facility that they have there currently. This all fits their final master plan for that PCD. Just a couple of things. They are having a number of clean rooms in this facility, so again, similar to their first phase. And overall, they're looking at about 600 employees with the first and the second phase. There is a third phase planned, so they will be back eventually with that. We've looked through everything, and like we said, it does conform to their original master plan for that, so they can move forward with this. And staff, we are looking at, if you are to approve this, we have some recommendation to recommend on to council for this, but we did have about 6 conditions that we were looking at. And one of them I just want to point out, we were talking with the architect and some discussion with them that we did add in here as number 5, some visual screening for the refuse collection. They were requesting that they have like a trash compactor. It's very large. They will make it the same color as their building, so it would blend in at some point. But we did feel that there maybe still needs to be some type of visual screening, so that's something we could discuss here. The other conditions are that the staff does go through all the final development plan to make sure it does conform, landscaping, stormwater, all of those kind of items. And that they remain in compliance with that master plan, the developer's agreement that you do have it with the city, and any of your other obvious construction processes such as building permits, those kind of things. And then the 6th requirement, we did just remind them basically that they do have to come back for their third phase. They can't just go forward with that without some approvals. Their drawings are in your packet, and we can answer any questions that you may have.
You know, you had said at the outset, the building is what, 202,000 square feet?
Yeah,
With a mezzanine, I missed the number, was it 245,000?
245,000, yes.
And
So
that-
the footprint was
Okay,
Footprint's 202.
and that's, wow, and you said that's manufacturing square footage.
correct.
Wow. And the first building is,
The first
200?
building is 221,000 footprint, 284,000 total.
600 employees?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Did you find our previous conversations interesting?
Oh, of course. I do this for a living, right?
Insulted.
I'm like Mike. I'm like, oh.
I mean, you got to put these employees somewhere, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a lot of employees.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, sorry. Anybody?
You want a motion to approve
Yep.
the concept
And final. hold
and
second.
the final plan? Yeah.
Okay, motion second, further discussion?
With
With the 6 conditions that were listed out.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, motion's approved. Discussion possible action on concept, thank you, by the way. Discussion possible action on concept development plans for the redevelopment of the Hudson Golf Clubhouse at 201 Carmichael Road, St. Croix. View Partners LLC.
Sounds like we got a presentation.
Well, you don't even have a crowd anymore for all this, you know? Could have put you first.
Should've.
I should have called and, yeah, I should have
Shoulda,
recommended that. So basically, this is the renovation of the existing clubhouse. The clubhouse will remain. It's just going to be renovated, mostly inside.
Excuse me.
I'm sorry, yes?
Could you identify yourself, please?
I'm Angela Popenhagen with Stevens Engineers.
Yep, thanks.
And so as I was saying, yes, we're renovating the existing clubhouse to accommodate a daycare and a dental clinic. The daycare would be about 14,400 square feet of the building, and then the dentist office would be about 4,000 square feet. The concept right now is to just do some minor renovations on the outside of the building for the daycare specifically, well, both of them. But we would have, where there's an existing island in the front of the golf course, it would now be torn out, and we'd have some perpendicular parking that would allow for parents to quickly drop off their children and have access right directly to the front door. The back patio area, there is, the actual concrete would remain, but they would have 2 playground areas in the back, and then we are showing some employee parking at the back of the building. So those are the majority of the external improvements. From a parking standpoint, right now, there's 82 total stalls shown, and with this much reduced use, we only actually need 55 stalls, so we are definitely over-parked at this time. And that's kind of the improvements that we're looking at. We do have Mark Paschke here, the architect, who would, if you have any questions on the renovations from an architectural standpoint.
I'm just curious of how many kids are they going to handle at this thing? What's it designed for as to?
Capacity?
Capacity, yes.
Yeah, we're looking at 168 children. 32, there'd be 4 rooms of 8 each for infant care. 56, 4 rooms of 14 for toddlers 16 to 33 months. And then 80 students in a pre-K 3, 4, and 5-year-old suite.
Wow. Thank you.
Yep.
Has this property been purchased recently?
I guess so.
Brian Zeller with TELUS Property Services and Solutions. It's under contract, scheduled to close July 8th. I'm a minority partner, and there's one other investor.
Subject
Mary
to-
Claire?
I'm sorry.
And this may not, I just thought when we approved the new hotel going in, that part of that approving was that they were going to utilize this space as part of the whole project. I mean, so that's correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding was that this.
You're right, they had an issue and that fell apart.
So, because it was going to be a great banquet space, and it was be a great connection with the hotel.
I don't think there was a provision that they were hand in hand, but, you know.
I think we spent a lot of time discussing that, how that was going to complement.
Plus, we had given the principal over there a liquor license for 2 years while they were trying to negotiate this, and it just didn't work out, so.
There is, for what it's worth, a remaining cross-parking and cross-access easement that's still in place from that work that you did previously, and that will survive the sale. But each parcel is meeting their parking requirements. It's actually exceeding their parking requirements individually, which I was relieved to hear.
Brian, there's nothing else you can put there besides that? I mean, it was a great facility for us.
What, you don't like kids, Randy, or what?
Nope, I'm past that part.
I can tell you, Randy, that I tried, and I literally reached out to every banquet facility operator that I could find in the immediate area, and had 1 or 2 come through. And the feeling, the feedback I got was it was either a little too small,
A little too big.
or a little too big. And that was the problem that I ran into. and then I looked at different ways to multi-tenant it. And then candidly, the only one else that's expressed interest is a funeral home. So I'll let you decide which end of the lifespan you want, you think we should service.
We like new life. not-
Yeah.
Well, that's too bad, but I appreciate you trying to take over doing something with it.
Yeah.
Thank you for your work on that, Brian.
Do we have a motion?
So moved.
And I will second.
Motion and second for approval. Further discussion?
With the following conditions noted.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, motion's approved. Thank you. Discussion of possible action on final development plan, certificate of compliance and downtown overlay district review for 3rd Street living at 614 and 620 3rd Street, DPB Investment Partnership.
Ours?
My name is Lars Glockstein. I'm the architect for the project. What's been going on this morning, I met with the planning department and discussed some of the comments. And I don't know, did everyone get a comment, the response comment for this
No,
morning?
no, they would be conditioned on addressing all those comments that we had, so.
Okay. Most of you know what the project consists of. It's a 23-unit apartment complex. And we've got, we corrected the parking. We asked for a variance, and that got approved. And just, one of the comments that were made were some of the parking area, adjacent parcels, and I provided you the color drawing showing how the flow of parking in the traffic zones. I'm not sure what you want.
No, we did the concept, obviously, last time. The plan is substantively the same. You know, we have some comments, very minimal. We met with, obviously, Mr. Schofield's cohort, Eric Henningsgaard, worked through some stormwater stuff. Some basic general questions. Obviously, Lars had indicated that he would work on solving some of the existing parking challenges on the building to what would be the south. You're seeing that in this colored rendering that he provided. Other than that, it's the same as concept, and I have all the faith in the world that they'll make
I
sure
will
to.
move to approve with any stipulations the city might have. I want to thank you people for what you've done as far as that, and then bringing in a nice structure to hopefully complement our downtown business district.
Well, that's the goal that I'm trying to do.
I'll second it.
Got a motion, a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, motion's approved. Do we have a motion?
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Got a motion, second to adjourn. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed, motion's approved. We stand adjourned. Thank you all for being here.